Well, thanks very much, Mayor Bob Manning. I don't know if he read out the final part of that resume of mine, but it also says he enjoys listening to Jimmy Buffett. And of course, if you're in the tropics, Jimmy Buffett is entirely the music you should be listening to. So can I say what a pleasure it is to be here? Can I also acknowledge the Vice-Chancellor, Professor Sandra Harding, and a member of the Queensland Independent Commission of Audit appointed in our first week of government back in March 2012, and thank her for her work on that Independent Commission of Audit, because when we appointed people to that commission, we looked for people with a broad range of experience, and certainly Sandra, with her passion for regional and rural and far north Queensland, was an ideal choice, and I think in many ways has gone on to serve the people of Queensland very well in producing that report, as well as the role she plays as an advocate for James Cook University. To Mayor Bob Manning, who is a co-host of today's event, thank you, Bob. It's lovely to be back here again. To my parliamentary colleagues, Gavin King and Michael Trout, who are here. To the former Treasurer of Queensland and member for Cairns, Keith de Lacy, who's also here. There are many mayors from regional councils surrounding the Cairns City Council. I caught up with some of them at the morning tea session earlier. To Daniel Geschwin from the Queensland Tourism Industry Council, who I saw come in today, who's having a tough life. He's had 2 days down at Noosa at a tourism council, and now he's up here in Cairns at a Future of the Tropical Economies conference. I mean, there are some jobs you just couldn't pay to get. So to Daniel, I acknowledge you. Can I acknowledge my co-traveller, Kerry O'Brien, who was on the plane next to me on the way up yesterday. Although we didn't have a lot of opportunity to talk, I'm not sure whether both of us had had enough talking for a little period of time and just wanted some quiet time on the plane. And particularly can I thank Jeanette for your welcome to country and echo Bob's comments and say thank you for sharing such a wonderful part of the world with us. It's a delight to be here in Cairns again. And it is a delight to be here in Cairns. I got into my hotel room yesterday evening and the manager had left a card there. I was relaying this story to a few people saying, "Dear Treasurer, it's a pleasure to have you back staying at our hotel. This seems to be your second home at the moment." And indeed, Cairns has been my second home this year. I think this is now the 6th occasion that I've been up here. Most recently, I was up here only last week for a meeting of Australian trade ministers. We had a 2-day conference up here with Minister Rob. I'd also like to thank you for the opportunity to present the opening address today and say thank you for those who have come along. We're honoured that you have chosen Cairns and far north Queensland for this important conference, which I hope you will find inspiring and invigorating. The experience of life in the tropics here in Cairns is, on the whole, a positive one, but that isn't the universal story of life in tropical nations. There is much to be done to improve life for the almost 3 billion people who live in the tropics, and not least does that improvement going to come about by growing tropical economies. And when it comes to the world's tropical economies, Queensland has a unique contribution to make. Queensland is one of only a handful of developed economies in the tropics, and our expertise in living with both the opportunities and limitations of the tropics is something we can share with developing countries. Our geography means that we have significant population centres in both the wet and dry tropics, providing us with an insight into the broad ranges of opportunities and challenges. I'd like to congratulate Sandra and James Cook University on their leadership in the production of the State of the Tropics report that promoted this conference. It's just one example of the collaborative work being done in North Queensland that can make a contribution to the development of tropical economies. As that research points out, around 40% of the world's population is living in the tropics, and among them, 55% of the world's children under 5. These statistics alone must surely give us pause when it comes to thinking about the challenges of living in tropical zones. It's those challenges and how Queensland is meeting them that I'd like to talk further about this morning. When we're sitting here in Cairns in pleasant surroundings, it's tempting to think that the challenges of the tropics are about which sunscreen to use and perhaps the problem of mould on the walls in the summer. There's also a tendency by those living in other parts of the world to idealise the concept of the tropics, to spend snowy winters dreaming of palm trees, frangipani flowers and margaritas. This narrow vision from a travel brochure or a Gauguin painting leaves little room for the reality of the economic, social and political challenges of life in the tropics. For millions, those challenges include issues of reliable, safe food supply, affordable energy sources, adequate and appropriate health care, access to education, modern transport and infrastructure, and environmental protection, to name just a few. These are issues as much for us in a developed country as they are for those in developing nations. For example, how do we ensure children 800 kilometres to the north of here, on Thursday Island, have the same educational opportunities as children 1,700 kilometres to the south in Brisbane enjoy? How do we meet the challenges of affordable power for communities on Cape York? Invariably a question I get every time I come to Cairns and venture north. Is it possible or affordable to flood-proof the Bruce Highway? In developing nations, the issues will be different, but at their heart is a common quest to provide opportunity and an improved way of life for communities. Hand in hand with the quest for a better life goes the need for sustainable economic growth. Growth in the tropics is already outperforming the rest of the world, although it's coming off a lower starting base. In Queensland, the government is focused on growing our economy based on the 4 pillars of agriculture, construction, tourism and resources. We're forecast to have the equal fastest growing state economy in the nation this year at 3%, and the strongest growth in 2015-16 at 6% on the back of these massive gas projects beginning their export phase. But while resources will contribute strongly to growth as these projects come online, the Queensland Government has been very deliberate in building the 4 pillars so that not all our eggs are in the one basket. Saul Eslake, who will be known to some of you as the Chief Economist with Bank of America Merrill Lynch, recently reminded a Brisbane audience that future growth is shaped by a combination of population, participation and productivity trends. Our goal in Queensland is to lift productivity in a way that sustains economic growth, improves living standards and balances the needs of the natural environment. It's a goal that's shared with developing and emerging nations across the tropical zone. In Queensland, we've chosen to engage widely with the community in shaping both our financial reform agenda and our vision for the next 30 years, the Queensland Plan. And you'll hear more tomorrow morning about that plan from the Minister assisting the Premier, Deb Frecklington. For now, though, I'll just say an important plank in that plan is to encourage more Queenslanders to live and work in regional areas and therefore in the tropics. One of the challenges we face in achieving that goal is ensuring that we have the growth that will deliver jobs to our tropical region. People will not move from the southeast if there isn't the infrastructure and jobs to keep them in the north. Economic growth is not constant throughout the world's tropical zone. In Oceania, growth is in decline, but our trading partners in South Asia and Southeast Asia are growing strongly, accounting for 55% of economic output in the tropics in 2010, compared to just 31% back in 1980. Unprecedented growth in Asia has brought with it improved wealth in a rising middle class, with higher standards of living and consequently new trade and investment opportunities for us here in Queensland. Our developed economy, along with our geographic location, our biodiversity and a strong focus on research and innovation, mean Queensland has a competitive edge when it comes to providing goods and services for tropical economies. The science and practical know-how of Queenslanders, born out of living and working in the tropics, is also being tapped to develop not only our own economy, but to improve life in other tropical nations. Whether it is private enterprise, our academic institutions, government, or a combination of all three, Queensland has plenty on offer to tropical nations. Take, for example, the Brisbane-based company Australian Innovative Systems. They're designing the water systems for the 2018 Commonwealth Games on the Gold Coast, but their water disinfection technology is also helping to deliver clean water in 53 countries. The state government's Trade and Investment Queensland has helped AIS take their know-how to the world by opening doors in markets around the world. And along with water, food, of course, is the key need of developing nations. Our government has developed an agriculture strategy with the target of doubling food production in Queensland by 2040. Now, there is from time to time talk of a Northern Australia becoming the food bowl of Asia. It is attractive rhetoric, and we all know politicians don't mind occasionally exaggerating. But when it comes to agriculture, we need to play to our strengths. The Federal Agriculture Minister, Barnaby Joyce, recently put the food bowl discussion in perspective when he said, and I quote, "When we start talking about we're going to be the food bowl of Asia, at the very best, we feed about 60 million people now. If we doubled it, well, 120, 150 million people. We wouldn't even feed half of Indonesia. So if we can't feed half of our neighbour, stop talking about, quotes, we're going to feed the whole of Asia." Indeed, the discussion has turned, in my view, more realistically to how we can become the provider of premium produce and improved plant and animal breeds. These are fields where Queensland is already playing a leading role, supported by state government. In my first budget as State Treasurer, I was particularly pleased to be able to allocate almost $5 million for research into tropical pulses by the Queensland University of Technology. Genetic improvements in breeding, better salinity and drought tolerance, and improved pest management of these crops could mean greater availability of important protein sources for developing tropical nations, particularly those for whom eating beef is not an opportunity. To see more of the sort of innovative work being done in this space, you could drive an hour or so down the road to Innisfail. There you would find field trials being conducted by Professor James Dale, I affectionately call him the Banana Man, who is leading a team developing a strain of bananas fortified with vitamin A. Professor Dale's work could have major implications for countries like Uganda, where vitamin A deficiency is the major cause of preventable blindness, and where bananas form the major part of the diet. Our government has partnered with the University of Queensland to form the Queensland Alliance for Agriculture and Food Innovation. The aim of the alliance is to improve the profitability and sustainability of the tropical and subtropical agribusiness sector. Whether it is developing new wheat varieties, improving the genetics of tropical cattle, encouraging the uptake of a variety of corn that combats disease, or finding new ways to produce biofuels, the research being undertaken in Queensland has significant outcomes for the people of the tropical zone. Our strengths as a food provider are, of course, not just in the fields of research. Last financial year, Queensland exported $8.9 billion worth of agriculture and food products, representing 16% of the state's overseas commodity exports. We may not be the food bowl of Asia, but we are delivering a strong reputation for produce that meets the highest standards at every step of the journey from paddock to plate. Producers are increasing their efficiency and seeking out new markets in the growing economies of the tropical zone. Our agricultural producers are also very resilient, as they must be. The weather events of the tropics ensure that life on the land in Queensland is never dull. Here in far north Queensland, our banana industry was decimated in 2011 by tropical cyclone Yasi, which also savaged our sugarcane crops and cost the agricultural industry in the vicinity of $800 million in that year alone. 3 years later, 75% of our state is now drought declared. Our producers have to be nimble business operators as well as good farmers to deal with these challenges. Queensland's agronomists and agribusiness advisors have much to offer those developing economies faced with the same sorts of climate issues. Extremes of climate also impact on our built environment. We are no strangers to cyclones, storms, floods and bushfires. As a result, our building codes and standards are constantly evolving as we learn from our experience, and indeed James Cook University has played a very significant role in developing those codes and providing us with advice in relation to those matters. With 4 major cities and hundreds of smaller communities in our tropical region, we have a vested interest in developing and enforcing such codes to minimise the damage from natural disasters. Our own experience of planning, designing and building for the vagaries of nature in the tropics is something we've also been able to share with the world. The weather is not the only physical challenge of living in the tropics. The unique tropical environment brings with it a range of specific challenges to health and well-being. Queensland has established itself as a major medical research hub. Institutions such as JCU, Griffith University's Ascites Institute and the Queensland Institute of Medical Research are making significant inroads in the global fights against malaria, dengue fever and other diseases particular to the tropical zones. The Queensland Government is supporting many of those programs, and recently we've injected $42 million into the Australian Institute of Tropical Health and Medicine at James Cook University, and I'm pleased to say matched with dollar-for-dollar funding by our colleagues at the federal level, representing a tremendous investment in research capacity and faith in James Cook University. The first of several new facilities is already under construction in Townsville. And I should say, the facilities will not just be located in Townsville, with plans to take them all the way up to the Cape. And we hope that the Institute will be a global centre of excellence in tropical health, medicine and biotechnology. As a proud member of this government, I could probably keep you here all day regaling you with examples of what Queensland has to offer the tropical world. However, when I look down the list of eminent speakers that you have later today and tomorrow, I think I'll leave that to them. I'd like to finish, however, by touching on the need for resilience. For tropical nations to prosper, they need to be able to weather the storms, both literal and metaphorical, that come their way. We've learned through some tough times the value of resilience in our communities. A major weather event, a unilateral ban on livestock exports, or a sudden dive in the dollar. These are the sorts of events that have the capacity to damage economies and bring communities undone. We know, we've experienced it. But connected communities, where there are strong partnerships between individuals, families, community organisations, businesses, financial institutions and government, have the best chance of responding positively to unexpected challenges. This is why organisations including the UN and the World Bank have put an emphasis on building resilience, particularly in developing nations. It's no surprise, then, that the G20 leaders last year committed to an agenda that has economic growth and resilience front and centre. It's an agenda that finance ministers will take up when they meet here in Cairns this weekend. There is no doubt that Queensland will be a strong contributor to Australia's part of the target of increasing G20 output by 2% over 5 years. Queensland shares the interest of the G20 in boosting infrastructure investment and commercial developments to drive economic growth. As I have outlined today, I believe we also have considerable capacity to assist tropical nations in also achieving that growth. The benefits of growth are summed up well in the State of the Tropics report. Nations that have strong economic growth are better able to reduce poverty rates, strengthen political stability, improve the quality of the natural environment, and even diminish the incidence of crime and violence. That is surely an ambition worth putting all our efforts into achieving. Once again, can I thank you for the opportunity to open today's proceedings. I look forward to hearing the views and put forward and reflecting on the outcomes of the conference, although I won't be able to stay here all day. If this is your first visit to Cairns, I hope you will have time to see some of what this great city and its beautiful surrounds have to offer, and I wish you all the very best for the rest of your conference here in Cairns.
I just want to present you with these on behalf of the conference, and you can slip that into your top pocket.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Tim, when he was talking about our plane ride yesterday, he was referring to the fact that as he got on the plane, as I always do, I very carefully avoided any eye contact and was buried into my iPhone with the headphones on. At one point on the flight, I glanced out of the corner of my eye and noticed he was deep into his laptop and surrounded by papers, and it was only as we landed and I took my headphones off that I realised I was sitting next to the Queensland Treasurer. And I'll just have to, as a journalist, put that down to another one of a long list of lost opportunities in my life. But there you go.